Welcome again to Fifi and Fidos. Last time we did a little bit of a bit on nutrition and how to help our dogs get to 15 like Chica is. And people have had a couple of questions about, feeding, what we're supposed to feed, how we feed, what some of the concerns are, what we need to do to keep our dogs healthy so that they can reach 15. One of the most important things I think that we can do, besides of course feeding a good quality diet, is to keep an eye on how much you're feeding. One of the biggest things that your vets will tell you pretty much all the time is they see, and we see that here, are overweight dogs. And that is probably one of the things that can lead to more problems down the road for that animal. So I want you to think about watching how much you're feeding. Food manufacturers on their bags of, say, dry food and on any raw food, pretty much any food, will have a recommended feeding amount. And it will be, say, 1 cup for 40 pounds. And say your dog is 40 pounds. We're just going to use this as an example. And so you think that feeding that 1 cup is going to be exactly what your dog needs. And then you go to the vet, and the vet tells you that your dog's gained weight. What to do? Every animal has an individual metabolism and body chemistry. Every one of us different. And I compare it to a 150-pound person that is older is going to use a little bit fewer calories than somebody who is younger and more active. Their body chemistry may be different. You and I all know people who can sit there and look at a cupcake. I'm one of them. Gain 5 pounds just looking at a cupcake, and then you'll have your friends that can eat the entire cake and lose weight. Dogs are the same thing. So what I always recommend when you're starting to feed a food, any food, and look at the bag or box or whatever it is you're feeding from, really look at that recommendation. And if it says, say, a cup for 40 pounds or whatever it says, feed less. And by less, I'm saying 20% less. So I would actually even look at possibly going down to 3/4 of a cup instead of a cup. More and more manufacturers are getting to the point where they're giving you ranges. So if your dog is from 30 to 40 pounds, feed, 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup. But keep a sharp eye on it, because just feeding to the bag doesn't guarantee that you're going to be feeding the correct amount for your dog. I don't know if I mentioned it with Chica, but she's, as we've said, she's on a raw diet. And each raw manufacturer has a guideline for feeding, the feeding instructions. The feeding instructions on one of the foods that I used to feed her, and still feed her occasionally, was 12 to 14 ounces for her weight. She's 40 to 45 pounds. There was another one that was 14 to 16 ounces. Different manufacturers have different calorie counts in their food. And what I found is if I fed that much, especially as she started getting older and her metabolism changed and she became slightly less active, she gained weight. So Chica right now, the food that she eats primarily is Answer's pet food. And the food that she eats now will tell me that I need to feed her 8 to 10 ounces a day. She actually gets 5 ounces a day, which sounds like very little for a 45-pound dog, but it's a very nutrient-dense, food. And that's exactly, if I feed her 6 ounces a day, she will start gaining weight. And that's the last thing that I want to do for a 15-year-old dog that has arthritic paws. And it also hurts, like the hips and the joints and everything else. Too much weight. How do you know if your dog's getting overweight? One of the simplest tests that I give you is, the rib test. You should be able to easily feel the ribs. What does easily mean? So let me show you. Take your fist and rub your hands over your knuckles when you make a fist. That's too thin. If you're feeling that, that's too thin. You don't want to feel that much bone. That's a little bit too thin. Now flatten your hand out and feel the back of your hand. and you will be able to feel your bones in your hand, but it's not really bony like this. That's a good weight right there. And if you feel the back of your wrist, you can't even hardly feel the bones in the back of your wrist. So that's a good way that you can kind of get a feel for what your dog is. And you know, the dogs with the really heavy coats and the doodles and things like that, you may have to really reach in there and feed it. But you know, you can do it. You can do it. Why I stress this so much, and why, like I said, at Chica at 15, you want to start when they're younger, paying attention to their weight. I don't want to see a 3-year-old overweight lab come in. I really don't. Because I know that at 6, that lab is going to have knee issues, it's going to have joint issues, hip issues, back issues, because that excess weight puts a lot of stress on those joints. And I don't want to see that. We want to start with them young. I monitor Tipper's weight. You know, once a week I'll reach down and check his ribs and make sure. I actually had to cut him back a little bit, fewer treats, which he was not happy with, but hey, you know, I'd rather keep him healthy longer. And it's not just the excess weight affecting, you know, like the feet, the hips, the joints, you know, the neck, the spine. You have to remember also that that excess fat does just like it does to humans. It accumulates inside. It can accumulate around the organs, put pressure on the organs and things like that, which they really don't need. So the other thing that we're going to talk about, and again, I promised you the last time, we're going to start talking about, you know, different supplementations that you can use and starting them young to build into, you know, start with the anti-inflammatories early to keep the inflammation in the body down. One way that you can do it is through diet itself. A lot of people aren't aware of how many carbohydrates are in the foods that they feed. So I'm going to do a real quick kind of cheat sheet for you. This happens to be on dry food only. It doesn't, you know, canned food and your raw food are slightly different. So I'm going to hold this up, and I don't know if you can see it okay, but this is how you can figure out the estimated carbs in that dry food that you're feeding. So what you want to do is take the 100% and then subtract the amount of protein, subtract the amount of fat that it shows on that nutrition panel, subtract the amount of moisture that's showing in that food. And then some foods will show ash, but if they don't, you still want to add ash in there because that's just a natural, it's basically a residue from the extrusion process. All foods have it, some foods list it, some don't. I use 8%. So let me show you what this looks like with the real food. And this is just happens to be Kirkland is one of the ones, because I know a lot of people feed Costco food. So here we go. We have our protein. Here's 100% up here. Our protein is 28%. Our fat is 17%. Our moisture is 10%. And I'm using the 8% for the ash. So the estimated carbohydrates in this food, and again, it's not, you know, hard science, but it's really, really close. Everything else that's left is carbohydrate. It's 37%. That's a lot of sugar. That's a lot of carbohydrates. For an omnivore like humans, we're omnivores. That's a lot for us. You know, 37% is pretty darn high. For a scavenging carnivore, like what our dogs are, it's really, really high. This will create inflammation in the body because it's like converts to sugar, and it can cause long-term health effects with hips, joints, the organs, and everything else. So next time we get together, I'm going to start talking about some of the natural food-based, you know, additives that you can add to the food that will help counter some of the natural inflammation that happens with our animals as they age. And we'll show you I'll show you everything that I do with Chica. And then we're going to have 1 or 2 that are specifically on 1 or 2 of those supplements because there's a lot to get into with those. So until next time, keep your pets healthy.